She helped an elderly woman at the airport, and days later, the woman's millionaire son changed her life. Before we start, comment here where you are watching from. I love knowing how far these stories reach. And if you like love stories, subscribe to the channel. That way you help this project grow and motivate me to bring even more emotional stories to you. I have a goal of reaching 1,000 subscribers. Help me by subscribing down here, please. Emily Parker zipped up her denim jacket, adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder, and let out a tired sigh. Her shift as a barista at the busy Phoenix airport had ended just a few minutes ago, but as always, she walked slowly, observing the people around. Families saying goodbye, hurried executives, confused tourists. That place, despite being noisy, always made her think about how many stories crossed paths there, silently. As she passed by one of the boarding areas, she noticed an elderly woman struggling to lift a suitcase far too large for her fragile frame. She had pale, wrinkled skin, carefully cut grey hair at chin length, and wore a light blue dress, elegant but discreet, partially covered by a silk scarf draped over her shoulders. Her trembling hands indicated not only her advanced age, but also the effort of handling the heavy luggage alone. Emily stopped walking. She just couldn't ignore that scene. She approached with a kind smile and asked, "Can I help you with your suitcase?" The elderly woman looked surprised, but soon her grayish blue eyes shone with relief. "That would be wonderful, dear. These airports seem to get bigger and the suitcase is heavier," she replied in a soft but slightly breathless voice. Emily smiled, easily picked up the suitcase, and walked alongside her. "Which gate are you heading to?" "B13. But I think I got a bit lost along the way," the woman confessed, laughing awkwardly. Emily, used to tourists getting confused, safely guided the elderly woman through the corridors. As they walked, they chatted about trivial things. The woman introduced herself. "My name is Evelyn Lancaster." Emily didn't recognize the last name, nor the weight it carried. She just naturally replied, "Nice to meet you, Evelyn. I'm Emily." As they approached the gate, Evelyn paused, leaning against the side of a seat to catch her breath. Emily, noticing her fatigue, asked with concern, "Do you want me to get you a cup of water?" Evelyn smiled, gently touching the young woman's arm. "You are so kind. It's been a long time since I found someone willing to help without expecting anything in return." Emily just shrugged. "It doesn't cost anything to be kind." Evelyn, moved by the simplicity of the answer, looked at her deeply. In the young woman's green eyes, there was a rare purity, a silent strength. Emily then ran back to the cafe and bought a cup of water and, with the little money she still had, a small coffee, remembering how cold and impersonal that airport could feel for those traveling alone. "I brought water and a coffee. I hope you don't mind," she said, handing the cup to the woman. Evelyn held the coffee with her trembling hands and with teary eyes murmured, "You have a beautiful heart, my dear." Emily sat next to her, waiting until they announced boarding. "Are you traveling to visit family?" she asked, curious. Evelyn smiled, but there was sadness in that smile. "Yes, my son sent me tickets so I could spend a few days at his house. But you know, sometimes I feel that even surrounded by people, I'm still alone." Emily didn't know what to say right away. She just held her hand, squeezing it affectionately. "I'm sure he'll be very happy to see you." Evelyn slowly shook her head. "I hope so. Sometimes he's so busy. I think he doesn't even see me as a mother anymore, but as an obligation." Before Emily could say anything, they announced boarding for Evelyn's flight. Emily helped her up and pushed the suitcase to the front of the line. "Thank you, Emily. I don't know what I would have done without you today." Emily smiled. "Just take care of yourself, okay?" Evelyn held the young woman's hand a second longer and, looking straight into her eyes, said, "I hope, with all my heart, that love finds you." When you least expect it. Emily felt a shiver at those words. Thank you. Evelyn got in line, disappearing shortly after through the boarding corridor. Emily stood there, staring into the void, unaware that that simple gesture of kindness would end up being the beginning of the biggest turning point of her life. She sighed, adjusted her bag again, and walked through the hot, dry Phoenix airport, thinking her life would stay the same, not knowing that in just a few days, everything would completely change. Emily remained there for a few seconds, as if Evelyn's steps disappearing through the gate had taken a piece of that sweltering Phoenix afternoon with them. The metallic sound of flight announcements mixed with the hurried dragging of suitcases on the polished floor filled the space, but she seemed to hear nothing. The elderly woman's words echoed in her mind. May love find you when you least expect it. She took a deep breath, trying to shake off that strange feeling tightening her chest, and turned to make her way to the airport exit. But in the middle of the crowd rushing by, one persistent thought followed her. Why did those words affect her so much? As she walked through the corridors lit by the enormous windows that let the desert's scorching sun flood the space, Emily ran her fingers over the old keychain hanging from her bag. It was a small metallic heart, a gift from her mother that read, "You deserve to be happy." In recent months, that seemed like a concept as distant as the destinations announced on the terminal's electronic board. Outside, the dry heat made the asphalt shimmer under the intense light. Emily paused for a moment at the entrance to the parking lot where buses and taxis crossed at a frantic pace. She breathed in the hot air, adjusted her red hair tied up in an improvised bun, and closed her eyes for a few seconds, trying to gather strength. The day had been long, like all the others, and she knew that when she got home, she would find the pile of overdue bills on the worn wooden table and, perhaps, a new notice from the landlord threatening eviction. But at that moment, she didn't want to think about that. She just wanted to hold on to that simple and beautiful scene, her helping an unknown woman who left with a grateful look and a sincere blessing. May love find you. Emily smiled, but it was a melancholic smile. How long had it been since she'd felt the warmth of a tight hug, of a hand holding hers, not out of necessity, but out of affection? Her last relationship had ended 2 years ago, leaving deep scars and a quiet distrust that now seemed to be part of who she was. Suddenly, a child's shout cut through the air. "Mom!" And she saw a kid running toward a woman getting out of a taxi. The mother bent down and picked him up, spinning him around with joy. Emily watched the scene for a few seconds with a lump in her throat. When will it be my turn? She thought. She quickened her pace and headed to the bus stop, where she always waited to return to the small apartment in the modest neighborhood where she lived. While the bus didn't arrive, she sat on the metal bench and, distracted, opened her phone to check messages. No news, no new job opportunities, no miracles. She sighed, dropped the phone on her lap, and with her gaze lost in the constant movement of the airport, she recalled the moment she held Evelyn's fragile hand. That touch had something different, as if it were a silent bond, an invisible connection between 2 women from different generations, but marked by the same feeling, that of sometimes being invisible to the eyes of the world. The bus, finally, arrived, braking with a sharp screech. Emily got on, sat near the window, and as the vehicle pulled away, she watched the airport fade into the distance. She would never imagine that at that very moment, Evelyn was on the plane, with discreet tears in her eyes, thinking about the young woman who had helped her and making a silent decision that would forever change both their lives. Emily didn't know, but that seemingly trivial encounter would be the first thread of an intertwined destiny. A simple gesture, but one that would cross all barriers of chance, social class, and loneliness. The bus traveled along the highway surrounded by Arizona's arid mountains, and on Emily's face, the reflection of the sunset tinted her fair skin. with golden hues. The warm wind came through the half-open window, lightly moving a few loose strands of her hair. She closed her eyes for a moment, unaware that in just a few days, her life would take a turn she couldn't have imagined even in her wildest dreams, and so the desert remained silent, while destiny was already preparing to act. As the bus got lost among the hot avenues of Phoenix, Emily's life quietly moved towards the unknown. On the other side of the country, thousands of miles away, in an imposing mansion surrounded by meticulously cared-for gardens in the sunny city of Austin, Evelyn Lancaster was finishing unpacking her bags, her heart still warmed by the unexpected encounter with that young woman from the airport. In the spacious living room, illuminated by the huge glass windows, Evelyn sat in a beige linen armchair while the subtle aroma of the garden flowers entered with the light breeze. She picked up the phone on the solid wood side table and with her fragile fingers dialed her son's number. Christopher Lancaster answered on the second ring with the firm, impersonal voice he usually used in business meetings. "Hi, Mum. Did you get there okay?" Evelyn smiled, closing her eyes for a second, as if she could hug him through the line. "Yes, my dear. I got here just fine." Christopher settled into the office chair, a minimalist space with bookshelves and business awards carefully aligned. He had always been like that, methodical, efficient, rational, the kind of man who had learned too early not to show weaknesses. Evelyn took a deep breath before saying, "I met a young woman at the airport, a sweet girl. She helped me with my bags, stayed with me until boarding. She was so kind." Christopher gave a slight smile, almost as if he were listening to an ordinary story. "I'm sure she wanted a tip or was after some kind of advantage." Evelyn frowned, disappointed by her son's harshness. No, she didn't want anything. She was just generous. Christopher leaned back in the leather chair, crossing his arms over his chest, his grayish-blue gaze fixed on the arid landscape outside the office window, as if seeking refuge in the external desert to escape the internal discomfort those words caused. "Mom, you know how people are these days. Everyone wants something in return." Evelyn softly gripped the armrest, but her voice, though fragile, sounded firm. No, this girl was different. For a moment, Christopher was silent, hearing only his mother's gentle breathing on the other end of the line. Evelyn continued as if wanting to immortalize that memory. "She had a look, so pure, so honest. She reminded me of how I used to be before life hardened me." Christopher slightly furrowed his brow. That bothered him more than he wanted to admit. He had always admired his mother's strength, but hearing that vulnerability from her unsettled him. "Are you okay?" he asked, masking his concern with his usual coldness. "I'm fine. I just wanted you to know. There are good people, even when we don't expect to find them." Evelyn let out a small sigh, like someone carrying a silent burden, and concluded, "I wish you could meet someone like that, Chris. Someone who would look at you with truth." Christopher clenched his jaw, uncomfortable with that emotional exposure. "Mom, you know I don't have time for that kind of thing." Evelyn smiled tenderly, already used to her son's emotional resistance. "I know, I just wanted you to know that she made me feel good." "That's good," he replied, ending the call with a polite but cold, "Talk to you later, Mom." As soon as he hung up, Christopher stayed still, staring at nothing. His mother's words echoed in his mind with an unsettling force. Someone who would look at you with truth. He got up from the chair, walked over to the huge window, and watched the sun beginning to set in the orange Texas sky, tinting the distant hills with gold. He couldn't explain it, but that description, that image of the young woman helping his mother, stirred something in him. He wanted to believe his mother was just romanticizing some random gesture, but there was something in the way she spoke, as if that girl had left an invisible mark, not only on Evelyn, but now also on him. He took a deep breath and, as if trying to push away dangerous thoughts, went back to the desk, organizing reports and documents, burying himself once again in work, his usual refuge from everything he couldn't control. But for the first time in years, a nameless face, a woman without an identity, invaded his mind and stayed there. As the day ended and the mansion filled with long shadows, Christopher had no idea that this invisible connection would end up being the guiding thread that would irreversibly transform his life. In the days that followed, Emily returned to her quiet routine at the Phoenix airport, serving coffee, cleaning tables, and smiling at hurried passengers who didn't even notice her presence. That encounter with Evelyn had remained in her memory as a beautiful but fleeting moment. Like so many others that daily life had taught her to leave behind. She had no idea that on the other side of the country, destiny was already silently plotting a twist capable of turning her life upside down. On a stuffy morning, while Emily was preparing a tray of muffins to restock in the display case, a co-worker excitedly approached, holding her phone. "Did you see this?" she asked, breathless, her eyes wide. Emily frowned, wiping her hands on her apron before taking the device. On the screen, an amateur video showed exactly the scene she had lived days before. There she was, holding Evelyn's hand, smiling tenderly as she helped the elderly woman to sit down. The caption read, "In times of indifference, a simple gesture warms hearts." Emily widened her eyes in disbelief. "Who filmed this?" she asked, almost in a whisper as she felt her hands go cold. "I don't know. All I know is it's already got over 2 million views." The co-worker laughed, excited. "You're famous." Emily gave a nervous smile, but inside her heart was racing. That unexpected exposure left her unsettled. She had always been a reserved, discreet woman who preferred to observe the world from a distance, and now, suddenly, millions of people were seeing one of the most intimate moments she never imagined would be shared. While Emily tried to process everything in Austin, inside the luxurious office of a glass skyscraper, Christopher Lancaster was scrolling through social media between meetings, looking for a momentary distraction amidst the charts and reports that always filled his mornings. His attentive gaze stopped on a video that kept popping up in his feed, shared by friends, colleagues, and even media outlets. The image of the red-haired woman holding his mother's hand flashed across his screen like lightning. He widened, his eyes unable to believe what he was seeing. "No, impossible," he murmured, leaning closer to the screen, as if getting nearer could confirm the reality before him. He played the video again, and there it was, his mother Evelyn, fragile but smiling, being cared for by a young woman with red hair, fair skin, green eyes overflowing with tenderness, and a warm, vibrant smile. Christopher felt an unexpected tightness in his chest, realizing that this scene, so intimate and so public at the same time, was now in front of millions, and now in front of him. He paused the video and stared for a few seconds at the frozen image of Emily smiling. Something in that look stirred him in a way he couldn't explain, nor wanted to admit. "Who are you?" he whispered. Alone in the silent office, he took a deep breath and ran his hand through his dark brown hair, feeling a discomfort he hadn't experienced in a long time. It wasn't just the surprise of seeing his mother exposed like that, but a deep unease, a silent, inexplicable attraction to that woman he didn't know, but who seemed to carry a rare strength and purity. He put the video on full screen and watched it again, noticing every detail, the way she leaned in to help his mother, the genuine smile, the care with which she adjusted Evelyn's bag strap, and above all, the attentive look, full of empathy, as if saying to the world, "I'm here, I care." Christopher felt a strange twinge, as if something was beginning to crack in the emotional armor he had built over the years. He tapped his fingers rhythmically on the desk, trying to rationalize what he was feeling. "Must be just a feeling," he murmured, shutting the laptop abruptly and getting up. He walked to the glass window that offered a panoramic view of the city, with its imposing buildings, rushing cars, and the pulsing life under Texas's clear sky. But no matter how hard he tried to focus on the horizon, his mind kept returning to the same image. That simple, serene, red-haired woman holding his mother's hand with an affection he himself hadn't shown in a long time. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to push away the uncomfortable sensation, but he knew that scene wouldn't leave his mind anytime soon. And while the sun shone brightly over the city, Christopher couldn't imagine that the video would be just the first link in a chain of events that would not only force him to re-evaluate his preconceptions, but would forever change the course of his life. While Christopher remained restless before the glass window of his office, trying to push the image of that red-haired woman out of his mind on the other side of the country, Emily's life continued in its silent rhythm, marked by exhaustion, invisible struggles, and the persistent hope that, despite everything, still kept her standing. That stuffy night in Phoenix, Emily pushed open the rusty door of her small apartment, located in an old building with stained walls and narrow hallways. She dropped her bag onto the broken kitchen chair, took off her worn-out shoes, and took a deep breath, letting the hot, dry air fill her lungs. The silence inside was absolute, interrupted only by the distant hum of an old air conditioner that had needed maintenance for weeks, but which she couldn't afford to fix. She walked over to the improvised table by the window and pulled open the drawer from which she took her navy blue notebook, worn at the edges, but something she cherished: her journal. She sat on the edge of her thin mattress bed, with the lamp casting a dim yellow light over the blank page. She picked up the pen, took a deep breath, and for a few seconds just stared at the empty sheet, as if searching within herself for words that could be bigger than the pain. Then she wrote in delicate yet firm handwriting, "Will someone ever love me for who I am, not for what I have?" She set the pen down on the paper and stared at that sentence, while her eyes burned, threatening to overflow. She ran her hand over her face, wiping away the tears before they could fall. She didn't want to cry. Not again. She stood up and went to the small fridge, where she grabbed an almost empty bottle of water and took a few sips while looking out the window at the night sky, stained with a dark red typical of Arizona's hot nights. Out there, the city lights shone brightly, but inside that apartment, Emily felt invisible as so many other times. A woman who served coffee, who cleaned tables, who smiled at strangers, but who, upon coming home, was just herself, vulnerable, dreamy, and above all, lonely. She sat back down on the bed, hugging her knees, and looked at the small picture frame on the dresser. An old photo of her and her mother, back when she was a teenager, both smiling at a picnic in a park. She gently touched the edge of the frame. "You always said I deserved to be happy," she murmured, as if she could be heard through time and distance. Looking around, she saw the bills piled up on the table. A rent due notice, bank notifications, and a letter from the landlord threatening eviction if payment wasn't made by the end of the month. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to push away the despair that threatened to invade her soul. "It's going to work out. It has to work out," she repeated to herself like a mantra. But deep down, she felt that emptiness no logic could fill. The desire to be loved, not out of pity, not out of charity, but for who she really was, a simple, strong woman who, despite the scars, still believed true love existed. She closed the journal, put it back in the drawer, and turned off the lamp, lying down on the bed. She stared at the ceiling, following the movement of the shadows cast by the streetlight coming through the cracks in the curtain. As sleep wouldn't come, she silently asked herself again, I wonder if somewhere someone is thinking of me? She had no idea that miles away, a lonely man, used to protecting himself behind numbers and contracts at that very moment, couldn't stop thinking about her, even without knowing her name. And as the night stretched on, stifling and silent, fate was already setting up the next steps of a story neither of them would be able to control. While Emily finally fell asleep, overcome by exhaustion and the thoughts that haunted her night after night, Christopher, on the other side of the country, couldn't find peace. Her image, frozen in that video scene, occupied his mind with a disconcerting intensity. He tried to rationalize it, as he always did with everything in his life, but there was something about that woman, something that couldn't be explained with logic. The next morning, he decided to do the unthinkable. He took the first flight to Phoenix. He didn't tell his mother nor his assistants, much less his company's employees. He wanted to do this alone, away from any eyes or judgment. Just him and that inexplicable need to see, with his own eyes, who the woman was who, with a simple gesture, had shaken the very foundations he believed were unshakable. The plane landed under the strong desert sun, and while the driver waited, with the limousine at the terminal exit, Christopher chose to walk alone to the main hall of the airport, the same place where his mother had been helped days before. He took a deep breath as he crossed the automatic doors and was immediately surrounded by the familiar mix of hurried voices, metallic announcements, and the constant aroma of fresh coffee. He followed the flow of people until he located the small, discreet corner cafe where, according to his quiet investigation, she worked. He stopped a few feet from the counter, his heart racing in a way it hadn't in years, not since he had lost his wife to a cruel disease that had consumed his hope and, along with it, much of his ability to believe in love. There was Emily, behind the counter, arranging the display case, with delicate hands and kindly smiling at an elderly couple thanking her for the service. She wore the simple cafe uniform, a white shirt with sleeves rolled up to the elbows and a wrinkled black apron, but to him she looked like the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Christopher stood there motionless, observing her every move, the way she brushed her red hair up in an effortless bun, how she slightly tilted her head when listening to customers' orders, and above all, how she smiled. A sincere, pure smile without defenses. He felt his chest tighten, a strange warmth rising up his throat. It wasn't possible. He shouldn't be feeling that, but he was. He approached the counter, taking a deep breath, and when she turned to serve him, her green eyes met his for the first time. "Good morning. What can I get you?" Emily asked, with that smile that, without knowing it, had already won over millions on the internet. And now, him. Christopher hesitated for a second, lost in the soft tone of her voice. "A coffee. Black, please." Emily smiled again and turned to prepare the drink while he couldn't take his eyes off her, mesmerized by how she worked the coffee machine with quick, sure movements, like someone who knew that even amid chaos, she needed to keep her sweetness. "Would you like
sugar?"
she asked, placing the paper cup on the counter. Christopher gave a small smile for the first time in a long time and replied, "I think not today." Emily chuckled softly, grabbing the change. "Then it's ready." When she handed him the cup, their fingertips brushed briefly, and Christopher felt a shiver, as if that touch was the link he hadn't even known he was looking for. "Thank you," he said, taking the coffee, but not leaving right away. Emily, noticing the hesitation, raised her eyebrows, curious. "Anything else?" Christopher took a deep breath, trying to hold back the almost irrational urge to sit there for hours listening to that voice, seeing that smile, discovering who she was beyond that image he had watched over and over in the video. But he simply answered, "No, just have a good day." She smiled once more. "You too." He slowly walked away, feeling his heart pounding like it hadn't since the days he used to believe in love, before everything he had lost. He sat at one of the tables farthest from the counter and stayed there, discreetly observing her as she interacted with each customer, always with that same kindness, that same silent dedication that disarmed him more with every passing minute. As he held the hot cup between his hands, Christopher realized, with a sharp clarity, that this woman was completely different from anyone he had ever known. And for the first time in years, he wasn't afraid of what he was feeling, but he also knew in that very moment that he couldn't reveal who he was. He couldn't explain why, but he wanted her to know him before she knew the name he carried. And as Emily continued working, unaware of the man watching her with a gaze that mixed fascination, respect, and a hint of longing, Christopher understood that this wasn't just the meeting of two strangers. It was the meeting of two worlds, and as the aroma of coffee spread through the air, he knew his life had just changed, and she had no idea. Christopher stayed at that distant table for several days in a row, always ordering the same black coffee, always searching in Emily's quiet routine for comfort in something he couldn't even name. It wasn't just attraction. It was something deeper, almost a need to be near her, to see her smile, to hear her sweet voice, calling customers by name. At first, Emily treated him like just another polite, quiet customer. But as the visits went on, she began to notice that man with the attentive eyes and reserved manner as someone different. He seemed to listen with more than just his ears, as if, with every exchange of words, he was searching for a piece of her soul. That afternoon, the Phoenix sun scorched the sidewalks, but inside the cafe, the air conditioning softened the heat. Christopher was sitting at the counter as he always did, when Emily, smiling, placed the coffee cup in front of him. "Black coffee, as always," she said, crossing her arms and leaning on the counter in a casual gesture. Christopher gave a small smile, looking directly into her eyes. "You already know my order." Emily laughed, tucking a loose strand of red hair behind her ear. Hard to forget when someone orders exactly the same thing every day. He took a deep breath, feeling courage slowly building up, fighting against the irrational fear that always paralyzed him whenever he thought about asking her out. "Emily," he began, his voice lower, almost as if he feared the invitation might escape his mouth before he could finish it. She tilted her head slightly, curious. "Yes?" Christopher looked at the cup, then back at her, and then took a leap with an impulse he didn't even know where it came from. "Would you like to have dinner with me tomorrow?" Emily froze for a second, her green eyes wide with surprise. Then she smiled, that smile that made his heart beat faster. "Dinner with you?" Christopher nodded, feeling as insecure as he hadn't felt in years. "Yes, if you'd like, of course." She let out a nervous laugh, and for a moment seemed to weigh all the difficulties of her life, the work, the bills, the exhausting routine. But then, as if deciding that yes, she did deserve a little happiness, she answered, "I'd like that." He let out a relieved but discreet smile. "Great, I can pick you up here after your shift." Emily bit her lower lip, holding back her happiness. "Okay." The next day, he was waiting for her at the cafe's exit, wearing a light blue shirt with sleeves rolled up to the elbows and linen pants. Simple, elegant, but intentionally understated. He didn't want her to suspect who he really was. Emily appeared shortly after, wearing a soft-toned floral dress that seemed to highlight even more the delicate shade of her fair skin and the red strands falling loosely over her shoulders. "You look beautiful," he said, unable to hide his admiration. Emily blushed, lowering her eyes. Thank you. You too. He opened the car door for her, and they went together to a small, cozy restaurant, away from the tourist center. Christopher had chosen the place carefully, simple, intimate, with a patio, offering a discreet view of the mountains surrounding Phoenix. They sat at a table by candlelight, while the warm night breeze blew softly, carrying the scent of desert, flowers. Emily looked around, impressed. This place is beautiful. Christopher smiled, resting his gaze on her. Not as beautiful as you. Emily laughed, shaking her head, a bit shy. Do you always talk to women like that? He shook his head sincerely. No, actually, it's been a long time since I've said anything like this to anyone. Emily watched him for a few seconds, as if trying to decipher the layer of mystery he carried. You're not from around here, are you? Christopher shook his head. No, I came for work, and ended up staying. She smiled, unsuspecting of the truth he was so carefully hiding. During dinner, they talked about many things. Emily spoke about the struggles of paying rent, the exhausting job, the dreams she had to postpone in order to survive. I always wanted to be a social worker, to help people who, like me, fight every day, but life sometimes doesn't allow it. Christopher listened to her with rare attention, like someone wanting to memorize every word, every gesture. And then when she asked, "And you? What do you do?" He hesitated. He looked at the wine glass, thought about the truth, thought about the weight his last name carried, and chose a half-truth. I own a company, small, in technology. Emily smiled, not noticing his discomfort. It must be nice working with something like that. Christopher forced a smile and looked away toward the horizon, where the sky was beginning to fill with stars. It can be, but not always, she frowned. Why? He took a deep breath, as if fighting against a past that still hurt. Because I lost someone a few years ago. And since then, I haven't been the same. Emily stayed silent, respecting the pain that spilled through his words. She simply reached her hand across the table, softly touching his. Christopher looked at her hand on his and felt his chest tighten. That simple gesture, but full of meaning, broke down the wall he had built around his heart since he lost his wife. They stayed like that in silence for long seconds, just looking at each other, while around them the soft music filled the warm Arizona night. When they left the restaurant, Christopher walked her to the car, opened the door for her, and, before she got in, he stood there staring at her, as if fighting against an impulse greater than himself. Emily also stood there, looking at him, her heart racing like it hadn't in a long time. Christopher leaned in slightly, but stopped, took a deep breath, and simply whispered, "Good night." "Emily," she smiled, understanding without needing words. "Good night." He watched her get in the car, close the door, and stood there, watching as she drove away, taking with her that strange and overwhelming feeling that for the first time in years he wanted and feared falling in love again. Christopher stood there on the sidewalk, watching Emily's car fade into the illuminated city streets until the taillights disappeared on the horizon. The warm desert wind blew against his face, but it wasn't the heat that made him sweat. It was the silent turmoil stirring inside him. Back at the hotel, he dropped the keys on the desk, loosened his collar, and sank into the armchair, running his hands through his dark brown hair. He looked up at the ceiling of the large, silent room, surrounded by luxury and comfort, but lifeless. He felt torn, in a way he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. On one side, the intense desire to be near Emily, to get to know her more, to let her fill that emptiness that had consumed him since losing his wife. On the other, fear. A corrosive, silent fear that if he revealed who he really was, the magic would break and Emily would pull away. What if she's only being sincere because she thinks I'm just an ordinary man? He murmured to himself, staring at his tired reflection in the wall mirror. He knew how money and power could distort everything. He had seen it so many times, relationships that began and ended on the surface, never going beyond what his bank account could offer. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes, replaying the moment when she held his hand at dinner, with a disarming simplicity that, for the first time in years, made him wish someone would see, not his name, his company, his fortune, but him, just him. Meanwhile, Emily was finishing another exhausting day at the cafe. It was past midnight when she arrived at her small apartment, took off her shoes, and collapsed on the couch, still wearing the floral dress she had worn to dinner. Her heart was still racing, and the smile stubbornly lingered on her lips. She picked up her phone and, as she did every night, sent a message to her best friend, Rachel. "Tomorrow, after my shift, you need to come over. I have something to tell you." The following afternoon, the two of them were sitting on the small couch in Emily's living room, drinking iced tea, while the scorching Arizona sun streamed through the gaps in the curtain. Rachel, a young woman with short brown hair and an easy smile, looked curiously at her friend. "So, who's this mysterious man you told me about?" Emily smiled, hugging the pillow against her chest. "He is different, Rachel." "Different? How handsome? Rich? Dangerous?" Rachel laughed, teasing her. Emily shook her head, smiling tenderly. "He sees me." Rachel frowned, leaning in closer. "What do you mean?" Emily let out a deep sigh, trying to put into words what she was feeling. "He looks at me like he really sees who I am. Not just the girl who serves coffee or the woman who lives in this tiny apartment, but me. I feel alive when I'm with him." Rachel smiled, moved. "Emily, that's beautiful." Emily nodded, looking down, a quiet sparkle in her eyes. "Yeah, but it's also scary." Rachel gave a small smile. "Why?" Emily looked up, biting her lower lip, as if afraid to say out loud what she already knew in her heart. "Because I'm starting to fall in love, and I don't even know who he really is." On the other side of the city, Christopher, at that very moment, was walking along the hotel balcony, looking at the city lights shining brightly under the starry Arizona sky. His phone rang. It was Evelyn. He answered but stayed silent, listening only to his mother's soft breathing. "Chris, is everything okay?" she asked, noticing the distant tone in his voice. He closed his eyes, letting the words out in a whisper. "I don't know, Mom. I think I'm falling in love." Evelyn smiled on the other end of the line, with the silent wisdom of someone who knew her son better than he knew himself. "Then don't fight it." Christopher didn't respond. He just stood there looking out at the night, his heart torn between the desire to give in and the fear of being rejected when the truth was revealed. And as the warm wind blew, silent and persistent, he knew that sooner or later he would have to choose, keep the comfortable lie or risk the truth, and maybe lose the only real chance at happiness life had offered him, since love had been ripped away years ago. That morning, the Phoenix Airport Cafe was busier than usual, with tourists and executives rushing by. Emily, as always, kept a serene smile on her face as she served orders, but her heart was restless. Since the dinner, her meetings with Christopher had become more frequent, and with each new conversation, she felt more involved, closer to him, even without knowing who he really was. While wiping down the counter, she heard the door open and, for an instant, a shiver ran down her spine. When she looked up, she saw a familiar figure approaching with slow steps, Evelyn Lancaster. The elderly woman walked with a calm smile, her grey hair carefully styled, wearing an elegant light-colored outfit that contrasted with the simplicity of the place. Emily, surprised and confused, dropped the cloth she was holding and went to meet her. "Evelyn, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice soft but full of curiosity. Before she could say anything else, Evelyn opened her arms and wrapped Emily in a tight, warm hug, leaving her completely speechless. Emily stood still for a few seconds, feeling that unexpected gesture, until, with a mix of confusion and tenderness, she returned the hug. When they pulled away, Emily frowned, worried. "Are you okay?" Evelyn held the young woman's hands firmly, looking directly into her eyes with that same affectionate sparkle from days ago. "Much better now." Emily smiled, relieved, but still without understanding the reason for that sudden visit. Evelyn took a deep breath, like someone preparing to say something that would change everything, and then said, with the naturalness of someone revealing a simple truth, "You met my son, Christopher." The words hung in the air like silent lightning. Emily felt the world around her slow down. Her breath caught for a second, her eyes widened while her heart pounded unevenly. "How? What?" she stammered, confused, searching her mind for some explanation. Before Evelyn could continue, the cafe door opened again, making the small bell above it chime. And there, standing at the entrance, was him, Christopher. He wore a crisp white dress, shirt, perfectly fitted dark pants, and his expression, the same look she had faced so many times, but now it seemed different, more tense, more exposed, more human. His steps were slow but determined, until he stopped a few feet from them. Emily looked at him stunned, her heart racing, her hands cold. He tried to smile, but the nervousness turned it into something restrained, almost painful. Evelyn, sensing the weight of the moment, squeezed Emily's hand one last time, let out an emotional sigh, and quietly stepped away, leaving the two alone, under the curious eyes of some customers watching the scene without understanding. Christopher stepped closer, stopping in front of her. "Emily," she took a step back, as if needing space to process everything. She looked him up and down, and then finally said, her voice choked, It was you? All this time?" He nodded, unable to find enough words to justify his choice to hide who he really was. I needed you to know me before you knew my last name." Emily brought her hand to her mouth, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to explode. The pain of feeling deceived mixed with the intense confusion that took over her mind and heart. Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her eyes brimming with tears. Christopher took a deep breath, fighting against the anguish that suffocated him. "Because I was afraid that everything would change, afraid that you wouldn't look at me the same way, like you did from the very first day." Emily closed her eyes, trying to control the avalanche of emotions. On one hand, she felt betrayed, deceived. On the other, she knew, deep down, that the man with whom she had shared so many sincere moments, the man who held her hand at dinner, who made her laugh and dream again, was real. When she opened her eyes, she looked at him firmly, even though inside she was falling apart. "I need some time." Christopher nodded, respecting her decision, even though his chest burned with the possibility of losing her. "I understand." Emily stepped to the side, grabbed the cloth she had dropped before, and began wiping the counter mechanically, as if she needed to cling to any routine to keep from falling apart right there in front of everyone. Christopher stood there for a few seconds, looking at her, the pain evident in his gaze, until, without saying another word, he turned and left the cafe, leaving behind the smell of fresh coffee, the distant sound of airport announcements. And Emily's heart broken and confused. She leaned her hands on the counter, closed her eyes tightly, and let a solitary tear run down her face, without knowing yet that this wouldn't be the last time he would surprise her. The days that followed the revelation were a silent torment for Emily. At the cafe, she kept up the routine with the same practiced smile, but her eyes no longer sparkled as they once did. Every time the door opened and a customer walked in, her heart would race, hoping to see him, wishing he would appear, and at the same time, fearing that he might. Christopher, on the other hand, had returned to Austin only physically, but his soul remained there, trapped in that simple cafe, where he had found, without even looking, the truest and most unexpected love of his life. He tried to respect her space, tried to believe that time would soothe the pain of the disappointment, but the emptiness he felt was unbearable. On the seventh day, without seeing her, he decided he couldn't wait any longer. He took the first flight back to Phoenix, and without telling anyone, went straight to the airport. The cafe was crowded that afternoon. Passengers with luggage, families saying goodbye, hurried executives, and there she was, behind the counter, with her apron tied around her waist, serving a customer with the same professionalism as always. But Christopher noticed. There was sadness in her eyes, a shadow that wasn't there before. He stopped at the door, took a deep breath, and without hesitation walked across the room. Emily only saw him when he was already in front of the counter. The world seemed to stop. The conversations, the noise of the coffee machines, everything faded into the background. She set the tray down on the counter and stood still, staring at him with a tight chest, her heart pounding hard. Christopher, his eyes fixed on hers, took one more step forward and in front of everyone spoke with a voice firm but filled with emotion. "Emily, I hid who I am, but I never hid how I feel about you." The few customers nearby stopped their conversations, curious about the scene. He continued, swallowing hard, fighting against the anguish. "I've never loved anyone like this, with so much truth, with so much desire." Emily brought her hand to her mouth, feeling the tears welling up in her eyes. Christopher took a deep breath and stepped even closer, closing the distance between them. "I understand that you're hurt, that you felt betrayed, but I couldn't leave without first saying, please let me prove that my love is real." Emily couldn't hold back the tears. She let them run freely down her face, while her heart, so wounded days ago, now seemed to be pulled irresistibly toward him. She dropped the cloth she was holding, quickly went around the counter, and without thinking, ran to him. She threw herself into his arms, wrapping him in a tight, intense hug, like someone seeking in that embrace the refuge she had always wanted. Christopher held her tightly, closing his eyes, letting the world disappear for a moment. When they pulled apart, he looked at her with infinite tenderness, wiped her tears with his fingertips, and said, his voice breaking, "Emily, I also came here because I want to make your biggest dream come true." She looked at him, confused, sobbing through the tears. "What?" He smiled, holding her hands firmly. "I want to pay for your education, so you can finally become a social worker, like you've always wanted." Emily's eyes widened, completely speechless, and more, he continued, emotional. "I want you to work with me at my company. I've created a new social project, and I want you to be the coordinator, but all of this only if you want to." Emily, with tears streaming down her face, shook her head, laughing through her sobs. "Are you serious?" Christopher nodded, smiling. "More than ever." Emily hugged him again, holding him as tightly as she could, like someone refusing to let go. He ran his fingers through her hair and then, looking into her eyes, finished, "And more than anything, I want to build a future by your side." Emily closed her eyes, letting a silent tear fall. Never in her entire life had she felt so loved, so chosen, so seen. The cafe, once filled with noise, now seemed to have fallen silent, respecting. That moment that felt like a scene from a movie, but they didn't care. There, embraced in the middle of the airport, among suitcases and departures, Emily and Christopher had found something rare. Something that neither time, nor distance, nor lies could destroy. True love, born from sincerity, forged in pain, and now, finally, declared. Months passed since that day when, in the middle of the airport, between suitcases, departures, and reunions, Emily and Christopher hugged like people who had finally found their place in the world. Life, once so marked by a harsh routine, now blossomed in new colors, with possibilities Emily had never dared to imagine. That morning, the sun shone brightly over Phoenix, casting a golden glow on the modern facade of the newly inaugurated social foundation created by Christopher, a spacious and welcoming place built in the heart of the city, dedicated to young people in vulnerable situations. Emily walked through the main hall with a serene smile, wearing a light white blouse and linen pants, her red hair loose and wavy, swaying gently as she greeted each staff member with the same kindness as always. Now, she was the coordinator of the social project she had envisioned with Christopher, offering courses, psychological support, and opportunities to those who, like her, once had to choose between surviving or dreaming. In the office next door, Christopher, sitting at a large light wood desk, was organizing some papers when he saw Emily pass by the glass door. He couldn't help the discreet, knowing smile that always appeared when he saw her, as if, even after all those months, he was still surprised by the luck of having her by his side. She walked into the room, went up to him, and placed her hand on his, squeezing it gently. "Ready for the official opening?" she asked, with that sparkle in her eyes that had become the guiding light of his new life. Christopher nodded, bringing her hand to his lips and kissing it softly. "As long as you're with me, I'm ready for anything." Emily smiled, moved, and together they left the office for the ceremony, where dozens of young people and families waited eagerly. In the front row, Evelyn watched the couple with a heart overflowing with joy. She wore a delicate floral outfit, her grey hair pinned up with a pearl clip. When Emily and Christopher stepped onto the small stage to thank everyone for coming, Evelyn discreetly held the hand of one of the volunteers beside her and whispered, with an emotional look, "True love doesn't see status nor appearance. It simply recognizes." The words came out with the ease of someone who had always known, deep in her soul, that the strongest love is the one born in a look, needing neither titles nor explanations. At the end of the ceremony, Emily went to one of the wooden benches under the shade of a tree in the courtyard, sat down, and opened the journal she had carried with her since the hard times. The same navy blue notebook, now filled with pages of overcoming and new stories. She wrote, with the calm and confident handwriting she had developed alongside her own strength, "I helped someone, and, without knowing it, I helped myself." She closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the sun and the soft scent of the flowers in the garden she had helped plant there, as a symbol of new beginnings. Then, hearing familiar footsteps approaching, she opened her eyes and saw Christopher smiling, holding out his hand to her. She took his hand, stood up, and holding him close, looked out at the horizon, completing in her thoughts and in her heart that sentence she had just written. "Love found me when I least expected it." And there, under the blue Arizona sky, among so many transformed lives, Emily knew with absolute certainty that the love they had found wasn't the result of luck or a whim of fate, but the courageous choice of two hearts that, even broken, dared to open again. So what did you think of this story? Leave your rating from 0 to 10 in the comments. I'd really love to know your opinion. If you liked it, give the video a thumbs up, share it with someone who will also be moved, and subscribe to the channel to follow all the upcoming stories. And before you go, I've picked out another emotional story that will definitely touch your heart even more.